Baby found a bear. Cub mouth taped shut. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning sun filtered through the towering pines surrounding the Mason family's remote cabin, casting dappled shadows across the wooden porch where 11-month-old Lily played. Her chubby fingers explored a collection of pine cones and smooth river stones her father had gathered for her. The cabin, nestled deep within Whispering Pines Forest, stood as a sanctuary away from the bustling city life the Masons had left behind just 3 days ago. Lily's mother, Eleanor, hummed softly as she prepared breakfast in the kitchen, occasionally glancing through the open window to check on her daughter. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, mingling with the earthy scent of pine needles and morning dew. Eleanor smiled as she watched Lily babble happily to herself, blissfully unaware of anything beyond her simple treasures. The forest around them breathed with life, birds chirping their morning songs, squirrels darting between branches, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. But beneath this peaceful symphony, something felt off. Eleanor couldn't place it, but a faint sense of unease prickled at the back of her neck. She dismissed it, attributing the feeling to their unfamiliarity with forest living. Lily suddenly stopped playing, her head tilting to one side as a strange sound caught her attention. It wasn't part of the forest's natural chorus. A muffled whimper, desperate and pained, coming from beyond the edge of the clearing. Her curious eyes widened, and she dropped the pine cone she had been examining. "What is it, sweetie?" Eleanor called, noticing her daughter's sudden stillness. But Lily was already crawling toward the sound, her determination evident in the set of her tiny shoulders. Just beyond the tree line, partially hidden by a fallen log and a tangle of brambles, lay a small brown bear cub. Its fur was matted with dirt and dew, its body trembling with each labored breath. But most disturbing was what had been done to its face. Layers of silver duct tape wrapped tightly around its muzzle, preventing it from opening its mouth. The cub's eyes, wide with terror and exhaustion, darted frantically as it pawed weakly at the cruel binding. Not far away, voices drifted through the trees, rough, callous laughter punctuated by the clinking of glass bottles. A group of 3 men, dressed in hunting gear but carrying no proper hunting equipment, stood in a small clearing. Their faces were flushed with alcohol despite the early hour, their postures relaxed as if enjoying a casual morning spectacle. "Bet it'll be dead by noon," one of them said, taking a swig from his bottle. "Bears can't go long without water." "Serves it right for getting into my trash last week," another replied, his voice slurring slightly. "Teach the whole bear family to stay away from humans." The third man, slightly younger than the others, shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just let it go now. It's learned its lesson." "Don't be soft," the first man sneered. "Besides, it's fun watching it squirm." Oblivious to the danger lurking nearby, Lily continued to crawl toward the struggling cub, her innocent mind unable to comprehend the cruelty that had been inflicted, but somehow understanding that something was terribly wrong. The distance between the cabin porch and the forest edge seemed immense for her small body, but she pressed on, driven by curiosity and an instinctive empathy that transcended her limited experience of the world. Eleanor turned away from the window momentarily to flip the bacon, unaware that her daughter had ventured beyond the porch steps. The forest had fallen strangely quiet now, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what would happen next. The bear cub's eyes locked with Lily's as she approached, its frantic struggling subsiding slightly. Something passed between them. A primitive recognition, perhaps, of another young creature. The cub's muffled whimpers grew softer, almost questioning, as Lily finally reached the fallen log. She paused there, her blue eyes wide with wonder and concern. The morning sunlight caught in her wispy blonde curls, creating a halo-like effect around her head. Her tiny hand reached out, hesitating just inches from the cub's matted fur. In the distance, a deeper, more threatening sound rumbled through the forest. The protective growl of a mother bear, separated from her cub and desperately searching. The hunters fell silent, their drunken bravado instantly sobered by primal fear. And there, in that suspended moment between innocence and cruelty, disaster and salvation, Lily's hand finally made contact with the suffering cub's fur. Time seemed to slow as Lily's small fingers sank into the cub's soft, matted fur. The baby girl let out a delighted giggle, oblivious to the danger. The cub's initial flinch gave way to a trembling stillness, its wild instincts warring with desperate need for help. Its dark eyes, glistening with pain and fear, studied Lily with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Meanwhile, Eleanor had just placed the last strips of bacon onto a paper towel when she glanced out the window again. Her heart nearly stopped. The porch was empty. The collection of pine cones lay abandoned. "Lily?" Her voice rose with the first tendrils of panic. "Lily, where are you?" She rushed to the door, coffee forgotten, bare feet slapping against the wooden floor. Outside, the morning breeze carried the unmistakable scent of a wild animal, musky, primal, and beneath it, something metallic that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "Derek!" she screamed for her husband, who was showering upstairs, unaware of the unfolding crisis. "Derek, Lily's gone." Back at the forest edge, Lily had settled herself beside the cub, her small hand patting its head with clumsy gentleness. The cub had grown calmer, its panicked breathing slowing as it sensed no immediate threat from this strange, hairless creature. The silver duct tape glinted cruelly in the dappled sunlight, tight bands cutting into the soft fur around its muzzle. Small drops of blood had dried where the edges had dug into sensitive skin. Lily frowned, her developing mind recognizing that something was causing the animal distress. With innocent determination, she reached for the edge of the tape that had started to peel back slightly near the cub's ear. Her pudgy fingers grabbed hold and pulled with surprising strength for one so small. The cub flinched, a muffled yelp escaping through its forcibly closed mouth as some fur came away with the adhesive. Lily paused, babbled soothingly, then tried again. This time more gently. The tape resisted, but began to give way millimeter by agonizing millimeter. The three hunters had fallen into tense silence, their earlier bravado evaporating at the sound of the mother bear's approaching growl. They stood frozen, uncertain whether to flee or remain motionless. "We should get out of here," whispered the youngest hunter, Marcus, his face pale beneath his stubbled cheeks. At 24, he had joined his uncle Ray and Ray's friend Vince on what was supposed to be a simple weekend hunting trip, not this cruel game that had spiraled beyond his comfort. "Shut up," hissed Ray, reaching slowly for the rifle slung over his shoulder. "Nobody move. Bears can't see well, but they track movement." "You said she wouldn't be back until evening," Vince accused, his voice trembling slightly despite his attempt to appear calm. "You said the mother always goes to the river this time of day. How was I supposed to know she'd change her routine?" Ray snapped back, his fingers closing around the rifle's strap. The growl came again, closer now, vibrating through the forest floor. Birds scattered from nearby trees in panicked flurries, their warning calls adding to the chaos of sound. At the cabin, Derek Mason burst onto the porch, hair still dripping from his interrupted shower, a towel hastily wrapped around his waist. "What do you mean she's gone?" he demanded, scanning the tree line with increasing dread. Eleanor pointed wordlessly toward the forest edge, already moving in that direction. "I only turned away for a minute," she gasped, her voice breaking. She was right there playing with the pine cones. Derek grabbed a baseball bat that leaned against the porch railing. A meager defense, but better than nothing. "Stay here," he ordered his wife. "Call the ranger station. Tell them we need help immediately." But Eleanor had no intention of staying behind. She followed her husband, her heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't have gone far, she insisted, trying to convince herself as much as Derek. "She's just learning to walk. She must be crawling." Their voices carried through the trees, adding another layer to the complex tapestry of sound as multiple dramas converged toward an inevitable collision. Lily had managed to peel away a small section of the tape, exposing a corner of the cub's muzzle. The cub's tongue darted out through the opening, tasting freedom. This small success emboldened the baby, who babbled excitedly and redoubled her efforts, pulling at the tape with focused determination. Unknown to the humans, another set of eyes watched from deeper in the forest. An older man with weathered skin and silver-streaked hair crouched motionless behind a thick pine trunk. Caleb Turner, the forest ranger who lived in a small cabin 3 miles away, had been tracking the bear family for months as part of a conservation study. He had spotted the hunters earlier that morning and had been following them, suspicious of their intentions. When he'd seen them capture the cub and tape its mouth, his first instinct had been to intervene immediately, but years of experience had taught him caution. 3 armed, intoxicated men could be unpredictable and dangerous. He had been about to radio for backup when he'd lost sight of them. Now, witnessing the baby with the cub, his blood ran cold with fear for both young creatures. Caleb reached slowly for his radio, only to find it missing from his belt. With dawning horror, he remembered setting it down on a rock while crossing the stream an hour earlier. He was completely alone, with no way to call for help. The mother bear's growls grew louder, punctuated now by the sound of breaking branches as she charged through the undergrowth, following the scent of her cub. Simultaneously, Derek and Eleanor's frantic calls for Lily grew closer. And at the center of it all, oblivious to the multiple dangers converging around her, Lily had managed to loosen nearly half of the tape. The cub's mouth was partially free now, allowing it to emit a soft, plaintive cry, a sound that would surely accelerate its mother's approach. The hunters heard it too. Ray raised his rifle, pointing it in the direction of the cry. "Don't," Marcus pleaded, placing a hand on the barrel. "You'll just make her angrier." Ray shoved him away. "I'm not waiting around to be mauled," he snarled. His finger moved to the trigger. At that moment, a sharp crack echoed through the forest as Marcus deliberately stepped on a dry branch. The sound startled a nearby grouse into flight, creating a distraction. In that split second, Marcus lunged forward and grabbed the rifle, wrestling it away from his uncle. "What the hell are you doing?" Ray bellowed, his face contorting with rage. "Stopping you from making this worse," Marcus replied, backing away with the weapon now in his possession. "We need to leave. Now." Vince grabbed Ray's arm as he moved to pursue his nephew. "He's right," he urged. "Let's get out of here before the mother bear finds us." Ray hesitated, his alcohol-fueled anger warring with his instinct for self-preservation. Finally, he spat on the ground. "Fine, but this isn't over," he warned Marcus. As the 3 men retreated hurriedly through the trees, a new sound joined the forest's chorus. The heavy, rhythmic thump of helicopter blades. A Park Service helicopter, on routine patrol, had picked up unusual activity in the forest and was coming to investigate. For a moment, It seemed as though the situation might resolve itself without tragedy. But then, a gust of wind carried Lily's scent directly to the approaching mother bear. The animal paused, her sensitive nose working overtime as she processed this new information. Her cub was with a human, a small one, but human nonetheless. Her protective instincts surged, overriding any caution. With a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very trees, she charged toward her cub and the baby beside it. Caleb burst from his hiding place, sprinting toward Lily with desperate speed. Derek and Eleanor emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the small clearing at exactly the same moment, their faces frozen in identical masks of horror as they spotted their daughter sitting beside the bear cub, tape dangling from her tiny fingers, utterly unaware of the massive brown bear charging directly toward her. Time compressed into heartbeats. Eleanor's scream tore through the air as she lunged forward, but Derek caught her arm, holding her back from certain death. Caleb changed direction, positioning himself between the oncoming bear and the baby, his arms spread wide, making himself as large as possible. A human shield with no weapon, no defense except his knowledge of bear behavior. "Hey, hey!" he shouted, his voice strong despite the fear coursing through him. "Back off! Back off!" The mother bear slowed momentarily, confused by this new obstacle. She rose onto her hind legs, towering over 7 feet tall, her massive paws equipped with deadly claws swinging in agitation. Her hot breath visible in the cool morning air, she let out another roar that vibrated through Caleb's chest. Derek inched forward, the baseball bat trembling in his white-knuckled grip. "Get my daughter," he said in a low, tense voice. "I'll distract it." "Don't move," Caleb commanded, without taking his eyes off the bear. "Any sudden movements will trigger her. She's protecting her cub." Eleanor sobbed quietly, her entire body shaking as she watched her baby, just feet away from death's jaws, still innocently working at the tape on the cub's muzzle. Lily remained blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding around her, focused entirely on her self-appointed task. Up above, the helicopter circled lower, its downwash creating a small whirlwind of pine needles and leaves. The noise agitated the mother bear further. She dropped back to all fours, her massive head swinging between the humans and her cub, calculation in her intelligent eyes. In that frozen tableau of terror and protective instinct, something extraordinary happened. The bear cub, with its mouth now half-freed, let out a plaintive cry and stumbled toward its mother. But instead of moving away from Lily, it placed its small body between the baby and the charging mother, as if returning the protection it had received. The mother bear halted, clearly confused by her cub's behavior. Her massive head tilted, nostrils flaring as she processed the complex scents and signals before her. Lily, finally noticing the commotion, looked up. Her innocent blue eyes widened at the sight of the enormous bear. But instead of fear, her face lit up with delight. She pointed a chubby finger and made a sound that, to everyone's shock, mimicked the cub's cry perfectly. The mother bear dropped her aggressive stance slightly, her eyes moving between her cub and the human child with evident confusion. The cub continued to stand protectively near Lily, its body language communicating something only its mother could understand. "Nobody move," Caleb whispered. "Something's happening here I've never seen before." Above them, the helicopter hovered, its occupants radioing for additional support as they observed the unfolding situation. Inside the cockpit, Park Ranger Sarah Chen reached for her tranquilizer rifle, preparing for the worst while praying she wouldn't need to use it. Lily, oblivious to the danger, reached out toward the mother bear with the piece of tape she had removed from the cub. She offered it up as if presenting a gift, babbling in her incomprehensible baby language. The mother bear's attention fixed on the silver tape. She sniffed the air, catching the scent of the hunters on it, mixed with her cub's blood and fear. Her eyes narrowed, but her aggression wasn't directed at the baby anymore. With deliberate slowness, she approached her cub, sniffing it thoroughly, registering the injuries and the remaining tape. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she began to gently lick and chew at the tape, helping to remove it from her cub's muzzle. Each piece she removed, she spat onto the ground with evident disgust. "I don't believe what I'm seeing," Caleb murmured, his professional detachment momentarily shaken by the scene before him. Derek and Eleanor remained frozen, afraid that any movement might shatter this impossible moment and trigger the bear's protective rage. As the final pieces of tape came free, the cub shook its head and opened and closed its mouth several times, testing its freedom. It made a series of soft, grunting sounds to its mother, who responded with gentle huffs. Then came the most extraordinary moment of all. The mother bear turned her massive head toward Lily and lowered it slightly, not in aggression, but in what almost appeared to be acknowledgement. For 3 heartbeats, the massive predator and the tiny human child regarded each other with a curiosity that transcended species. The cub approached Lily once more, touching its nose briefly to her hand in what could only be described as gratitude, before returning to its mother's side. "Oh my God," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. Above them, Ranger Chen lowered her tranquilizer rifle, equally moved by what she was witnessing through her scope. Slowly, with dignity that seemed almost deliberate, the mother bear turned and ambled toward the deeper forest, her cub following closely. At the edge of the clearing, she paused and looked back once, her dark eyes inscrutable, before disappearing among the trees. The moment she vanished, Eleanor broke free from Derek's grasp and ran to Lily, scooping her up in a fierce embrace, sobbing with relief and residual terror. Derek followed immediately, enfolding them both in his arms, his abandoned baseball bat forgotten on the forest floor. "You're okay, you're okay," Eleanor repeated, running her hands over Lily as if to reassure herself that her daughter was indeed unharmed. "Oh God, you're okay." Lily squirmed in her mother's tight embrace, her attention still on the place where the bears had disappeared. She pointed, making the same mimicking cry she had earlier, clearly wanting to follow her new friends. Caleb approached the family cautiously, his weathered face etched with wonder. "In 30 years as a ranger, I've never seen anything like that," he said quietly. She should have attacked. Every instinct should have told her to protect her cub from humans. The helicopter landed in a small clearing nearby, its rotors slowing as Ranger Chen and her colleague jumped out and hurried toward them. "Is everyone all right?" Sarah called as she approached, her tranquilizer rifle still in hand but pointed safely downward. "We're fine," Caleb answered, still shaking his head in disbelief. "No injuries. The bears have moved on." Sarah looked skeptical. "We saw the whole thing from above. That mother bear should have—" "I know," Caleb interrupted. "But she didn't. This little one," he gestured toward Lily, "was removing the tape someone had cruelly wrapped around the cub's muzzle. The mother seemed to understand she was helping." Sarah's expression hardened. "Tape? Around its muzzle? Who would do such a thing?" "3 men," Caleb replied grimly. "I was tracking them when all this happened. They headed east about 10 minutes ago." Sarah immediately spoke into her radio, ordering ground units to search for the suspects. Derek, finally finding his voice, addressed the ranger. "If this man hadn't been here," he said, nodding toward Caleb, "I don't know what would have happened. He put himself between that bear and our daughter." "Just doing my job," Caleb replied modestly. "But your daughter is the real hero here, somehow, she connected with that cub in a way I can't explain. As if to punctuate his statement, a series of caws echoed overhead. They all looked up to see a raven circling, its black wings spread against the blue sky. It made another pass before flying in the direction the bears had taken, as if following them. "Strange," Caleb muttered. "Ravens and bears often have a symbiotic relationship, but I've never seen one this interested." Eleanor, still clutching Lily tightly, looked up at the disappearing bird. "Nothing about this morning has been normal," she said shakily. What none of them could see was that about 100 yards into the forest, the mother bear and her cub had stopped. The raven landed on a branch above them, its intelligent eyes watching the humans in the clearing. The mother bear looked up at the bird, then back toward where Lily was, as if the two creatures were communicating in some ancient language beyond human understanding. The raven cawed once more before taking flight again, this time deeper into the forest. After a moment's hesitation, the mother bear followed, her cub trotting dutifully beside her. As the helicopter crew prepared to transport the Masons back to their cabin, a strange stillness settled over the forest. The wind died down, the birds quieted, and for a moment, it seemed as if the entire wilderness was holding its breath, marking the passage of something profound and unexplainable. Eleanor looked down at Lily, who had finally settled in her arms, drowsy after the excitement. "What did you do, my brave little girl?" she whispered. "What did you see that we couldn't?" Lily's only response was a contented sigh as she drifted off to sleep, her small hand still sticky with pine sap and traces of the duct tape she had removed from her unlikely friend. As the helicopter lifted off with the Mason family and Caleb 3 miles east, Ray, Vince, and Marcus trudged through increasingly difficult terrain. They had abandoned the main trail, hoping to avoid any rangers who might be in the area. The morning's warm glow had given way to a thickening overcast, and the temperature was dropping rapidly, unusual for this time of year. "We need to get back to the truck," Vince said, breathing heavily as they climbed yet another steep incline. His earlier buzz had faded, replaced by a throbbing headache and growing sense of dread. "This weather's turning." Ray spat on the ground, his face still flushed with anger. "We wouldn't be in this mess if my nephew hadn't gone soft," he growled, shooting a venomous glare at Marcus, who walked several paces ahead, still carrying the rifle. "Going soft?" Marcus stopped and turned to face his uncle. "You taped a baby bear's mouth shut and left it to die. That's not hunting. That's not even sport. It's just cruelty." "Since when did you become Mother Teresa?" Ray sneered. "You didn't object when we tracked it. You didn't say anything when we caught it." "I didn't know what you were planning," Marcus replied, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "I thought we were tagging it for the conservation study, like you said." Vince stepped between them, sensing the situation could escalate quickly. "Look, we all made mistakes this morning. Let's just focus on getting back to civilization before this weather breaks." As if on cue, a distant rumble of thunder rolled through the mountains. The 3 men looked up at the darkening sky. "There wasn't any storm in the forecast," Vince said nervously. "Forecasts are wrong all the time," Ray dismissed, pushing past them to take the lead. "The truck's only about 2 miles from here." They continued in tense silence for another 20 minutes before Marcus suddenly stopped, holding up his hand. "You hear that?" he asked, head tilted. The others paused, listening. At first, there was nothing but the rustle of leaves and another distant roll of thunder. Then they heard it. A rhythmic whomp, 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 growing steadily louder. "Helicopter," Vince identified it, his face paling. "You think they're looking for us?" "How would they know about us?" Ray demanded. but his bravado was clearly faltering. Nobody saw what we did. That ranger might have, Marcus said quietly. The one I spotted watching us when we first entered this section of the forest. Ray whirled on him. You saw a ranger and didn't say anything? I tried to tell you this morning, but you were too busy showing off for Vince, Marcus shot back. You said, and I quote, "Rangers can kiss my—" Shut up, both of you, Vince hissed, pointing through the trees. Look. Through a gap in the canopy, they could see the helicopter hovering about half a mile away, near where they had left the bear cub. Even from this distance, they could make out the distinctive green and brown of the Park Service paint job. They're at the exact spot, Vince whispered, his voice cracking. They found the cub. Ray's face hardened. So what? They can't prove it was us. Are you kidding? Marcus asked incredulously. Your fingerprints are all over that duct tape. We left beer bottles with our prints. Hell, you carved your initials into that fallen log, remember? To mark your territory? Ray's confident expression faltered for the first time. They wouldn't check for fingerprints over something like this. Assaulting wildlife in a national forest? Federal offense, Uncle Ray. They absolutely would, Marcus said grimly. And with your record, you're looking at serious time. Another helicopter appeared, joining the first, this one marked with the distinctive stripes of law enforcement. We need to move now, Ray decided, heading deeper into the forest, away from the helicopters and the main trails. You want to run? Vince asked, disbelief evident in his voice. In these mountains? With a storm coming. You got a better idea. Ray snapped over his shoulder, not slowing his pace. Marcus and Vince exchanged looks before reluctantly following. Neither wanted to be associated with what Ray had done, but abandoning him in the wilderness didn't seem right either, despite his cruelty. They pushed on for another hour, the terrain growing steeper and more treacherous. The temperature continued to drop, and the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly soaking through their light jackets. None of them had packed for extended hiking or bad weather, having planned to stay close to their campsite. We're lost, aren't we? Vince finally asked as they reached another identical-looking ridge. I know exactly where we are, Ray insisted, though his confident tone had a hollow ring to it. The truck is northeast of here, Marcus said, pulling out his phone. But I've got no signal to check the map. Put that away, Ray ordered. They can track cell phones. Only if they're on and they know the number, Marcus countered, but he pocketed the device anyway. The rain intensified, driven by a strengthening wind that bent the treetops and sent leaves swirling around them. Thunder boomed overhead, followed by a brilliant flash of lightning that illuminated the darkened forest in stark white light. We need shelter, Marcus shouted over the mounting storm. We can't stay exposed like this. Ray grudgingly nodded, scanning their surroundings. There should be some caves in that rock face. He pointed toward a cliff about a quarter-mile ahead. We used to camp there when I was a kid. They made their way toward the cliff, fighting against the wind and increasingly heavy rain. By the time they reached the rock face, they were drenched and shivering. The caves, Ray remembered, turned out to be little more than shallow indentations in the rock, but one was deep enough to provide some shelter from the downpour. The three men huddled inside, their earlier antagonism temporarily forgotten in the face of shared misery. Marcus propped the rifle carefully against the cave wall, making sure the barrel pointed away from them. Some great adventure this turned out to be, Vince muttered, wringing water from his soaked cap. Ray said nothing, staring morosely out at the rain. For the first time, he seemed to be considering the consequences of his actions. His hunting license would certainly be revoked. There would likely be fines, hefty ones, And if they pressed animal cruelty charges, possibly jail time. All because he'd wanted to show off, to feel powerful by dominating a helpless animal. Marcus watched his uncle's face, recognizing the belated self-reflection. Despite everything, he felt a twinge of sympathy. Ray had been his hero once, teaching him to fish and identify animal tracks when he was a boy. Somewhere along the way, that man had been lost, replaced by this bitter, angry version who measured his worth by his dominance over others. A sudden scuffling sound from deeper in the cave made them all freeze. "What was that?" Vince whispered, eyes wide. "Probably just a squirrel or a raccoon," Ray said, but he didn't sound convinced. Marcus reached for the rifle, moving slowly so as not to startle whatever might be sharing their shelter. Before his fingers touched the weapon, another flash of lightning illuminated the cave, revealing a pair of reflective eyes watching them from the shadows. All three men scrambled backward toward the cave entrance, nearly falling into the rain. "What is it?" Vince gasped. The animal moved forward slightly, revealing itself in the dim light. A large raven, its feathers sleek and black as midnight, perched on a rock outcropping. Its head tilted as it regarded them with an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. "It's just a bird," Ray said, his relief evident. "Stupid thing scared me half to death." The raven cawed once, the sound echoing strangely in the confined space. It hopped forward, still watching them, particularly Ray. "I don't like this," Vince muttered. "Birds don't act like that." "It's probably someone's pet," Marcus suggested. "Maybe escaped from a cabin nearby." The raven cawed again, then suddenly spread its wings and launched itself toward the cave entrance. The men ducked as it flew past them, out into the storm. They watched it disappear into the rain, its black form visible for just a moment before it vanished into the gray curtain of water. "Good riddance," Ray grumbled, settling back against the cave wall. None of them noticed the large paw print in the mud just inside the cave entrance, partially obscured by rainwater but unmistakably fresh. Nor did they see the dark shape moving stealthily through the trees outside, following the direction the raven had taken. As the storm raged on, the three men fell into an uneasy silence, each lost in his own thoughts. Vince dozed fitfully, exhausted from the morning's events and the difficult trek. Marcus stared out at the rain, wondering how this hunting trip had gone so terribly wrong, and how he could have prevented it. Ray's thoughts were darker, cycling between anger at being caught, fear of the consequences, and, most surprising to him, the first tendrils of genuine shame. The image of the bear cub struggling against the tape kept intruding on his consciousness, no matter how hard he tried to justify his actions. None of them spoke about what would happen when the storm cleared. The helicopters would still be searching. The evidence was still at the scene. The reckoning was merely delayed, not avoided. Outside, the forest watched and waited, its ancient rhythms undisturbed by the small dramas of human lives. The storm would pass. Justice, of one kind or another, would find its way to those who had disrupted the wilderness's fragile balance. And somewhere in the forest, a mother bear and her cub moved through the rain, guided by a raven soaring above the treetops, leading them unerringly toward the shallow cave where three men waited out the storm, unaware that their actions had set in motion forces they could neither understand nor control. Back at the Mason family cabin, as afternoon settled into early evening, the storm continued to rage outside. Eleanor sat in a rocking chair by the fireplace, cradling Lily, who had finally fallen into a deep sleep after the morning's excitement. Derek paced nervously by the window, watching the sheets of rain lashing against the glass. Ranger Caleb Turner sat at the kitchen table. nursing a cup of strong coffee as he spoke into his radio, updating his colleagues on the search for the 3 hunters. Ranger Sarah Chen had returned to the helicopter to coordinate the search efforts from the air, though the worsening weather had forced them to ground the aircraft temporarily. "Any sign of them?" Derek asked when Caleb finished his call. The ranger shook his head. "Nothing yet. This storm isn't helping. We've got ground teams searching, but visibility is near zero in some areas." "I still can't believe someone would do that to an animal," Eleanor said quietly, stroking Lily's hair. "Tape its mouth shut and leave it to die." "What kind of monsters would do such a thing?" "The worst kind," Caleb replied grimly. "Unfortunately, we see this sort of cruelty more often than you'd think. Some people come to the wilderness not to connect with nature, but to dominate it." Derek joined them at the table, glancing at his sleeping daughter. "What about the bears? Will they be all right in this storm?" "Bears are well equipped for bad weather," Caleb assured him. "They'll find shelter. I'm more concerned about those men. If they're lost in the mountains with this storm hitting, they could be in real trouble, especially if they're not prepared." "Would serve them right," Derek muttered, then looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that wasn't very charitable." "Understandable," Caleb said with a slight smile. "You nearly lost your daughter because of their cruelty. But trust me, the mountains don't need our help in teaching harsh lessons. They do that quite effectively on their own." A comfortable silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the rhythmic pattering of rain on the roof. Lily stirred in her mother's arms, but didn't wake, her face peaceful in sleep. "She's something special, your daughter," Caleb said, watching the child. "I've never seen anything like what happened today. That mother bear should have attacked. Every instinct, every piece of training I've had says she should have charged and not stopped until she perceived the threat was eliminated." "But she didn't," Eleanor said softly. "She saw Lily helping her cub." "It's more than that," Caleb mused, his weathered face thoughtful. "It was almost as if there was some kind of communication happening, something beyond our understanding." Derek was about to respond when a sudden powerful gust of wind rattled the cabin windows. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness save for the orange glow from the fireplace. "Perfect," Derek muttered, rising to his feet. "I'll check the fuse box. There should be some flashlights in the kitchen drawer." "I've got one," Caleb said, pulling a heavy-duty flashlight from his belt. He switched it on, casting a bright beam across the room. "Power outages are common up here during storms. The lines are vulnerable to falling branches." Eleanor held Lily closer, the child still miraculously asleep despite the commotion. "How long do they usually last?" "Could be hours, could be days," Caleb admitted. "Depends on the damage and how quickly the utility crews can get up here." Derek returned from checking the fuse box, shaking his head. "It's not the fuses. Looks like we've lost power to the whole cabin." Caleb nodded. "I'll radio the ranger station. Let them know." He stepped away to make the call while Derek gathered candles from a cupboard and began placing them around the room. As the warm candlelight filled the space, creating dancing shadows on the walls, Eleanor noticed something strange about the fireplace. "Derek, look at this." She pointed to a stone at the right side of the hearth that seemed to have shifted slightly, revealing a small gap. Derek knelt beside her, examining it. "That's odd. I didn't notice that before." He probed the gap with his fingers, feeling the edge of the stone. "It feels loose." Curiosity piqued. He pressed against one side of the stone. To his surprise, it pivoted smoothly, revealing a small hidden compartment built into the hearth. "What in the world?" Eleanor whispered, leaning forward to get a better look. Inside the compartment was a small wooden box, weathered with age but clearly handcrafted with care. Derek carefully removed it and placed it on the coffee table. "Should we open it?" he asked, looking at Eleanor uncertainly. "It's not our property," she reminded him. "This cabin belongs to your colleague." "True, but Jason said the cabin has been in his family for generations. He might not even know this is here." Derek ran his fingers over the intricate carvings on the box's lid, symbols that resembled paw prints, trees, and what might have been birds in flight. "These markings are unusual." Caleb returned from making his radio call, his expression curious as he noticed them gathered around the table. "What have you found?" They showed him the hidden compartment in the box. The ranger's eyes widened in recognition. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the box. Derek nodded and pushed it toward him. Caleb studied the carvings intently, his fingers tracing the patterns with evident familiarity. "These are Native American symbols, specifically from the Anishinaabe people who originally inhabited these mountains. This pattern here," he pointed to a series of interconnected lines, "represents the connection between all living things, and these," he indicated the paw prints and bird carvings, "symbolize spirit guides, the bear and the raven." "The same animals we encountered today," Eleanor said, a shiver running down her spine. "Yes." Caleb nodded, his expression thoughtful. The Anishinaabe believed that bears and ravens shared a special connection, both creatures of great wisdom and power. In their stories, ravens often guided humans to bears, or bears to humans when important lessons needed to be learned. The coincidence seemed too perfect to ignore, especially after the events of that morning. Derek leaned forward, intrigued. "Do you think we should open it?" Caleb hesitated, then shrugged. "It's not technically an artifact. It doesn't appear old enough to fall under protection laws. And if it belongs to your friend's family, they might want to know about it." With careful hands, Derek lifted the lid of the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded red cloth, lay 3 items: a small leather-bound journal, a silver pendant shaped like a bear paw, and what appeared to be a very old, yellowed photograph. Derek lifted the photograph first. It showed a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, standing in front of this very cabin. She wore clothing from the early 1900s, a long skirt and high-necked blouse. But what immediately drew their attention was the small bear cub standing beside her, and the raven perched on her outstretched arm. "This can't be a coincidence," Eleanor whispered, glancing at her sleeping daughter. "The same animals, the same cabin. What's the date on the photograph?" Caleb asked, peering closer. Derek turned it over. Written in faded ink on the back was, "Elizabeth Woodhaven, summer 1906, The Guardians." "Elizabeth Woodhaven," Derek repeated, frowning. "Jason never mentioned that name. His family name is Thornton." "Maybe she was a relative," Eleanor suggested, "or a previous owner of the cabin." Derek picked up the journal next, carefully opening the brittle pages. The handwriting inside was elegant but faded, difficult to read in the dim light. He moved closer to a candle and began to read aloud from the first entry. "June 15th, 1906. I have finally arrived at Grandfather's cabin after the long journey from Boston. Father insisted I not come alone, but I needed solitude after Thomas broke our engagement. The wilderness already speaks to me in ways the city never could. This morning, I encountered the most remarkable sight: a mother bear and her cub foraging near the stream. They seemed unafraid, as if they recognized me as a friend rather than a threat. I sketched them for hours, and they allowed my presence. I feel there is something magical about this place, something ancient and wise that transcends human understanding." Derek flipped forward several pages and continued. July 3rd, 1906. The most extraordinary thing happened today. I found the bear cub caught in one of the terrible steel traps the hunters leave scattered through the forest. Its mother was frantic, trying desperately to free it, but unable to understand the mechanism. Without thinking of my own safety, I approached and released the trap. The mother bear watched me, not with aggression, but with what I can only describe as gratitude. When the cub was free, it limped to me and nuzzled my hand before returning to its mother. As they departed, a raven swooped down and circled above us, cawing loudly as if in celebration. I feel changed by this encounter in ways I cannot yet articulate. Eleanor's eyes were wide as she glanced down at Lily. It's like history repeating itself, the same cabin, the same animals. Derek continued reading, his voice hushed with wonder. July 20th, 1906. The raven visits me daily now, often leading me to places in the forest where the bears can be found. I have begun to sketch them with an intimacy no naturalist has achieved before. There is an intelligence in their eyes that defies the common perception of wild animals as merely creatures of instinct. The mother bear watches me sketch, sometimes for hours, her eyes following my pencil across the paper. I feel as though I am being taught something profound about the connection between all living things. He turned the page and his voice took on a more somber tone. August 12th, 1906. Disaster nearly struck today. A group of hunters arrived in the valley, boasting of their plans to kill the nuisance bears that had been reported in the area. I knew they meant my bears. Without thought for propriety or safety, I confronted them, telling them the bears had caused no harm and were under my protection. They laughed at me, a lone woman threatening rough men with rifles. But as they moved to push past me toward the forest, the most astonishing thing occurred. The raven appeared, circling and diving at their heads, distracting them. And then, at the edge of the clearing, the mother bear emerged, rising to her full height and roaring a challenge that shook the very air. The men fled in terror, and I stood in awe as bear and raven seemed to acknowledge each other before disappearing back into the forest. Caleb leaned forward, his professional composure momentarily forgotten. This is remarkable. The Anishinaabe stories speak of certain humans who forge special connections with animal spirits. They called them dreamers, or those who walk between worlds. They were said to understand the language of animals and serve as bridges between the human and natural realms. Derek flipped to near the end of the journal and read one final entry. October 28, 1906. As winter approaches, I prepare to return to Boston, though my heart aches at the thought of leaving this place. The bears will soon hibernate, and the raven has not visited for 3 days. I fear our time together is coming to an end. Yet, last night, I dreamed they came to me with a message, that I would return, that this cabin would remain a sacred place of connection, and that someday another would come who could bridge the worlds as I have done. I leave behind this record and the talisman given to me by the Anishinaabe elder who explained the meaning of my experiences. May it find its way to the one who is meant to continue this legacy of understanding between human and animal spirits. As Derek closed the journal, a reverent silence fell over the cabin. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, something had shifted. A connection made across more than a century of time. Eleanor looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her arms. Do you think, could Lily be the one Elizabeth was writing about? The one meant to continue the legacy? It would explain what happened today, Caleb said quietly. The way the bears responded to her, the raven that followed them, it fits the pattern described in both the Anishinaabe legends and Elizabeth's journal. Derek picked up the silver pendant, the final item from the box. It was beautifully crafted, the bear paw design intricate and precise. When he turned it over, he found an inscription on the back. "For those who walk between worlds, the guardians will show the way." "This must be the talisman Elizabeth mentioned," he said, showing it to Eleanor. She nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. "It belongs to Lily now, doesn't it? She's the one it was waiting for." Before Derek could respond, his cell phone buzzed with an incoming text message. The storm must have eased enough for cellular service to return momentarily. He checked the screen, his brow furrowing. It's from Jason, the owner of this cabin. He says there's something important he forgot to tell us about the place. Something about his great-grandmother who lived here in the early 1900s. He wants to call as soon as possible. "His great-grandmother?" Eleanor repeated slowly. "Elizabeth Woodhaven?" "Must be," Derek agreed, looking again at the photograph. "The resemblance between Jason and this woman is there, now that I look closer. The same eyes." Caleb's radio crackled to life, drawing their attention. He answered it, his face growing serious as he listened to the transmission. When he clicked off, he turned to the Masons with a grim expression. "They've spotted one of the hunters. He stumbled onto a main trail about 2 miles east of here. Hypothermic and disoriented. He's being transported to the hospital now." "What about the other two?" Derek asked. "Still missing. But the man they found, Marcus is his name, he's saying some pretty strange things. According to the rescue team, he keeps talking about a raven leading them to a cave, and a bear that's hunting them down. They think it's just the hypothermia causing confusion, but—" He let the sentence hang unfinished, all of them thinking about the journal entries they'd just read and the events of that morning. "Which direction were they headed?" Derek asked, a strange urgency in his voice. Caleb consulted his map. "East-southeast from where we found Lily and the cub. There's an area there with some shallow caves in the rock face." Derek pointed to a passage in the journal he'd skimmed but not read aloud. "Listen to this. The bear's winter den lies in the eastern valley, within the ancient stone that resembles a sleeping giant. The Anishinaabe call it the Spirit Cave, a place where the veil between worlds grows thin." Caleb's eyes widened in recognition. Sleeping giant rock. That's where the rescue team found Marcus, near the cave system that runs beneath it. It's also known for unusual rock formations that create strange acoustic effects. Sounds carry and distort in unexpected ways. "And the other two men might still be there," Eleanor said, understanding dawning on her face, "in the bear's territory." Outside, the storm suddenly intensified, wind howling around the cabin like a living thing. A particularly violent gust rattled the windows, and in that sound, they could almost imagine the roar of an enormous bear, calling across time and space, awakening something ancient and powerful in the forest around them. Lily stirred in her mother's arms, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, her gaze seemed unfocused, distant, as if seeing things beyond the cabin walls. Then she smiled, a smile of such knowing serenity that it seemed impossible on the face of a child so young. She pointed toward the window and made the same soft grunting sound she had used with the bear cub earlier that day. And outside, just visible through the rain-streaked glass, a large black raven perched on the porch railing, its intelligent eyes fixed on the child inside, as if waiting for something momentous to begin. The raven's appearance sent a chill through the cabin. It was no ordinary bird. Larger than any raven Caleb had seen in his decades as a ranger, with feathers that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Its presence felt deliberate, watchful. "That's the same bird," Caleb whispered, moving slowly toward the window. The one that was circling above us this morning when the bears left. Lily squirmed in Eleanor's arms, reaching toward the window with unmistakable recognition and excitement. The soft bear-like sounds she made grew more insistent. "She wants to go to it," Eleanor said, her voice uncertain. "But that can't be safe, can it?" Before anyone could answer, Lily's demeanor suddenly changed. Her reaching hands dropped and her expression grew serious, almost adult-like in its focus. She turned her head, as if listening to something none of them could hear, then pointed firmly toward the east, the direction of Sleeping Giant Rock and the Spirit Cave. "Something's happening," Derek said, moving closer to his wife and daughter. "It's like she's trying to tell us something." Outside, the raven spread its massive wings and let out a loud, resonant caw that somehow carried clearly through the cabin walls despite the storm's fury. Lily responded with another sound. Not a bear's grunt this time, but an uncanny mimicry of the raven's call. "This is beyond anything I've encountered," Caleb admitted, his scientific worldview clearly shaken. "But I can't ignore what I'm seeing." He looked at the Masons, his decision made. "I need to join the search teams at Sleeping Giant Rock. Those men might still be there, and if what's happening is connected to the journal entries and the Anishinaabe legends—" He left the thought unfinished, but they all understood the implication. Something ancient and powerful had been awakened, bridging the human and animal worlds through Lily, just as it had through Elizabeth Woodhaven a century earlier. "I'm coming with you," Derek said firmly, already reaching for his jacket. "Derek, no," Eleanor protested. "It's too dangerous. The storm is already beginning to ease," he pointed out, gesturing toward the window where, indeed, the rain had lightened considerably. "And Caleb will need help navigating. I've hiked these mountains for years. I know the terrain." Eleanor wanted to argue further, but could see the determination in her husband's eyes. Instead, she asked, "What about us? Should Lily and I come too?" Caleb shook his head. "Too risky with a child this young, especially with night falling soon. The cabin is the safest place for you two. I'll radio the station, have them send another ranger to stay with you while we're gone." "There's no time for that," Derek argued. "If those men are in trouble, every minute counts, and if something unusual is happening out there, we need to understand it." Eleanor's eyes filled with worry, but she nodded reluctantly. "Be careful," she whispered, kissing Derek quickly. "Come back to us." Derek knelt beside Lily, who was watching him with those unnervingly knowing eyes. "I'll find them, sweetheart," he promised, though he wasn't entirely sure what he meant by them, the lost hunters, or the bears that seemed so mysteriously connected to his daughter. Lily reached out and touched his face with her small hand, the gesture somehow both childlike and ancient. Then she pointed again toward the east, her meaning clear. Caleb had already gathered his gear: a more powerful flashlight, a first aid kit, emergency thermal blankets, his service weapon, though he hoped fervently he wouldn't need it, and extra radio batteries. He handed Derek a spare raincoat and hiking boots he'd brought from his vehicle. "The storm's breaking, but it'll still be wet and treacherous out there," he warned. "Stay close and follow my lead." Derek nodded, taking one last look at Eleanor and Lily before following Caleb out the door. On the porch, the enormous raven still perched, unmoving despite their approach. It regarded them with intelligent eyes, then spread its wings and launched into the air with surprising grace for its size. Rather than flying away, it circled overhead 3 times before heading east, the same direction Lily had indicated, the same direction as Sleeping Giant Rock and the Spirit Cave. "Do we follow it?" Derek asked, feeling slightly foolish even as he said it. Caleb hesitated only briefly. "Yes," he decided. Everything about this situation is unprecedented. We follow the raven. They set off into the darkening forest, the storm now reduced to a light drizzle. The ground was saturated, making each step a challenge as mud sucked at their boots. The raven stayed just within sight, occasionally circling back as if to ensure they were still following. "It's guiding us," Derek said in wonder, "just like in Elizabeth's journal." Caleb nodded grimly. "Let's just hope it's leading us somewhere we want to go." As they hiked, Caleb radioed the search teams, informing them of their position and destination. The response was broken by static but clear enough. They had found Marcus, the younger hunter, suffering from hypothermia and what appeared to be shock. He was being transported to the hospital in the nearby town. The other two men, Ray and Vince, were still missing. The search had been hampered by the storm but would resume at full strength now that conditions were improving. "Any update on what Marcus was saying?" Caleb asked. "About the bear and the raven?" The radio crackled before the response came through. "He's still talking crazy. Says the bear is punishing them for what they did to her cub. Says the raven is her messenger. The doctors think it's just trauma and exposure." Caleb and Derek exchanged meaningful looks, but said nothing more about it over the radio. Who would believe them if they said they were currently following a raven that might indeed be some kind of messenger? They hiked for nearly an hour, the landscape growing steeper and rockier as they approached the eastern mountains. The raven remained their faithful guide, and strangely, the path it led them on seemed easier than it should have been. Fallen trees that should have blocked their way had convenient gaps. Steep inclines had natural stepping stones. Dense underbrush parted as if recently traveled. "It's like something is helping us," Derek murmured as they crossed a usually treacherous stream via perfectly placed stones, none of which wobbled despite the rushing water. "Or something is helping us help someone else," Caleb replied thoughtfully. The last light was fading from the sky when they finally approached the looming silhouette of sleeping giant rock, an enormous formation that, when viewed from the right angle, resembled a massive humanoid figure lying on its back. Countless generations of indigenous people had considered it a sacred site, a place where the spirit world touched the physical one. The raven circled the rock once, then dove toward a dark opening at its base, the entrance to Spirit Cave. "That's where Marcus was found," Caleb confirmed, checking the coordinates on his GPS unit. The search team said he was just outside the cave entrance, semi-conscious. As they approached, they noticed something unusual: a series of large tracks in the mud leading into the cave. Bear tracks. "These are fresh," Caleb said, kneeling to examine them more closely. "Made after the heaviest rain stopped, so within the last hour." Derek felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp evening air. "The mother bear from this morning." "Has to be," Caleb nodded. "These are consistent with her size. But what's she doing all the way over here? This is miles from where we saw her with the cub." The answer seemed to hang in the air between them. Unspoken but impossible to ignore. She was hunting. Hunting the men who had harmed her cub. The cave entrance loomed before them, a dark mouth in the ancient stone. The raven had disappeared inside, but its harsh caw echoed back to them, urging them onward. "We should wait for backup," Caleb said, though he made no move to retreat or call for assistance. "There's no time," Derek replied, already moving toward the entrance. "If those men are in there with an angry mother bear—" He didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew what a cornered, protective mother bear was capable of. Caleb drew his service weapon, though his expression showed how reluctant he was to use it. "Stay behind me," he instructed. "If we encounter the bear, no sudden movements. We back away slowly, Under no circumstances do we come between her and anyone she perceives as a threat to her cub." Derek nodded, his mouth dry with fear, but his resolve unshaken. Something had drawn them here. The same something that had connected his daughter to these animals. The same something that had united Elizabeth Woodhaven with the creatures of this forest a century ago. He couldn't turn back now. They switched on their flashlights and entered the cave, their beams cutting through the darkness to reveal a surprisingly spacious tunnel leading deeper into the earth. The temperature dropped noticeably as they moved away from the entrance, their breath fogging in the cool air. The bear tracks continued inward, clear in the soft silt of the cave floor. Alongside them were human footprints, 2 distinct sets, moving deeper into the cave. The men had come this way, and recently. "They're trying to hide from the storm," Caleb guessed, "or from the search teams. Or from the bear," Derek added quietly. They moved cautiously forward, the tunnel gradually widening into a larger chamber where multiple, smaller passages branched off. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like stone teeth, dripping water creating tiny, musical, plinking sounds in the otherwise eerie silence. "Which way?" Derek whispered, noting that the tracks were less distinct on the harder surface of the chamber floor. A harsh caw answered him as the raven suddenly appeared from one of the side passages, its dark form startling in the beam of their flashlights. It hopped forward, then back toward the tunnel, clearly indicating their path. "I can't believe I'm taking directions from a bird," Caleb muttered, but he followed nonetheless. This tunnel was narrower, forcing them to crouch slightly as they proceeded. The air grew colder and damper, the walls glistening with moisture. The silence deepened, broken only by their cautious footsteps and the occasional drip of water. Then they heard it. Voices. Human voices, tense with fear and argument, echoing from somewhere ahead. "We shouldn't have come this deep," one voice said, panic evident in its tone. "We'll never find our way out." "Shut up, Vince," another voice snapped back. "You want that thing to hear us? It's out there, I tell you. It followed us in." "Ray, be reasonable," the first voice, Vince, pleaded. "Bears don't hunt people. It's probably just looking for a dry place to wait out the storm, same as us." "You didn't see its eyes," Ray hissed. "It recognized us. It knows what we did to its cub, and that damn bird is working with it somehow, I swear." Caleb and Derek exchanged glances, the men's words confirming their suspicions. They moved forward more quickly now, guided by the voices and the occasional flash of the raven's wings as it continued ahead of them. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, but with a ceiling high enough to stand upright. Their flashlight beams revealed the 2 missing hunters huddled against the far wall, their faces pale with cold and fear in the harsh light. The men reacted instantly to the intrusion, Ray leaping to his feet with surprising agility for a man who looked half frozen. "Who's there?" he demanded, squinting against the light.